What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It's Friday, February 21st. We made it to the weekend. This month is flying by. And today we are going to wrap up the Rose Petal murder trial for Zachary Hughes. Yesterday we had closings, some jury questions in between, verdict, victim impact statements, and sentencing. Before we jump in, as you guys know, Bradley Post facing 9 different charges relating to the child abuse materials found on his phone after Christina's murder. His case is being prosecuted by the Attorney General's office, and it's a federal trial. None of that will be live streamed, and I'm not really going to cover his case in depth just because the subject matter disturbs me to my core. I do not want to go sit in court and see that stuff. But you guys know John Mello was arrested the day Zachary Hughes was on the stand. He was arrested as a direct result of Zachary Hughes's testimony. I went to his bond hearing Wednesday evening. Christina's sister gave a victim impact statement. He was held without bond for the moment. These are violent crimes he's charged with. And his next hearing is set for April 25th. If I'm in town, I'm planning on going to that hearing, and I will follow John Mello's case throughout trial. It's not even close to being over in this case. So let's pick back up. When we left off on Wednesday, Zachary Hughes finished his direct exam, and I was wondering, honestly, was the solicitor going to cross-examine Zack? Because, as you guys know, he blurted out 3 times the day before that Christina was abusing her daughter. I kind of thought the solicitor would cover everything in closings that he would have asked Zachary on cross, but he did ask one question. They show a photo of Christina's body on the ground, surrounded by blood, and the state asks Zack, when you drag Christina across the floor of the front room where you killed her, did you drag her by her arms or her ankles? Zack said he didn't remember, but he thinks the ankles. And that was the only question they asked. I don't think the prosecutor wanted that jury to hear anything about the child abuse materials through cross-exam. They sent the jury out. And the defense proffered to the judge some of the things Zachary would have testified to had the child abuse materials been allowed to come in. John Mello told Zack that Bradley Post had made comments at the cigar bar that Christina Parcell was hot, but Brad liked them younger. John Mello told Zack Christina Parcell was encouraged to be a prostitute by her parents, and she's a liar. John Mello told Zack that in late 2017 into early 2018, he reported to the Greenville County Sheriff's Office accusations of the child abuse. The investigator said the allegations were unfounded, and John Mello told Zack the investigator said not to communicate with him anymore. And in regards to the affidavit Zack submitted on September 21st of 2021, it did not contain allegations of child abuse. Those allegations had been made repeatedly and had not been acted upon. And Zack thought if he included that, it would not be something that was pursued. He thought the allegations of physical and mental abuse might be something that was looked into that would later lead to an investigation into the other. Now, the defense, of course, asked for a directed verdict on all charges, and they were denied. So let's get to closings from the state. The solicitor said this is a bit of a unique case. You rarely have a defendant testify and admit to the murder in a trial. I told you in openings, once you see and hear the testimony in the trial, and then he says, I did not know the defendant was testifying, but I said you would find he was a cold-blooded killer. The state and his testimony proves it beyond a reasonable doubt. Zachary Hughes is an admitted cold-blooded killer. Before Zack admitted to the murder on the stand, the state called 32 witnesses, presented 200 exhibits, and that is 4 terabytes of information if you put it on a hard drive. It's a lot of evidence to digest, but with Zack's admissions, many of the questions are answered. Regardless of what he believed in his head, actions speak louder than words, and we have a lot of cold, calculated actions. It's undisputed. He planned and broke into Christina's home with a .22, a knife, and roses. She had just come home from an interview, and Zack is a man she never met. He hit her with a gun, stabbed her 35 times, and severed her jugular vein and carotid artery. He goes through each charge and tells how the state proved it. For the harassment and the conspiracy to commit harassment, he reads the definition of harassment and says that's the photos and documents that was sent out. He said, obviously, it was Christina Parcell without any clothes on, and we did not introduce those in an effort to not embarrass her or her family. October 2020 through October of 2021, that's 1 year. And what happens throughout that year led to Christina Parcell's murder. Zachary Hughes had never talked to her, didn't know her, never met her. Everything he knew about her was told to him or showed to him by John Mello, who was in a nasty custody battle with Christina. He was on his fourth round of custody disputes, and they were always settled where John Mello would have significant custody of the child. That changed when he took the child to Italy. Christina found out on a social media post her daughter was there. From October 2020 to April 2021, the child is in Italy with little to no contact with her mother. And Christina did what any mother would do. She tried to get her daughter back. She went to Italy twice and she won. In April of 2021, when the child was sent back to Greenville, that set off John Mello. He was unhappy. That's when things turned for Christina, and ultimately she lost her life. Zack and John Mello met on the streets of Greenville in August of 2020. John was with the child, and Zack played a classical musical piece that John and the child liked. They all went out 5 or 6 times and got tacos, went to a museum, but the child didn't know who Zachary Hughes was. He played her a piano piece, and he was a friend of her dad's. From August to October, John Mello left for Italy, and Zack didn't spend any more time with the child again. He may have seen her on FaceTime with her dad or in videos, but Zack acted on the stand as if he saw into her soul and her eyes and thought he knew what she was feeling. He's drawing those conclusions on little information and whatever John Mello was feeding him. The child is back with her mom, and in May, they move to the Canebrake address with her aunt. At the same time, John is still in Italy. He and Zack decide to embarrass Christina. Let's make her look like a prostitute. That'll help get the child back. The photos of Christina were taken when she was younger, and this was between 2 consensual adults. Mello took those photos and used them as a weapon to try to make her look like a prostitute. May I present to you my daughter's mother, Christina, aka Caroline Warren. We have emails coming from Mullins Investigations at a protonmail.com email address. It has photos of Christina. No working URL. And on the escort site, it says the person became a member in 2009. At this point, it's 2021. The Guardian also received emails from Mullins Investigations. Zack went to the trouble of preparing all of these envelopes, manipulating the photos, the escort website, and added a cover letter to make sure you knew this was Christina engaging in prostitution. He sent those letters to shame her and make fun of her. Zack did the envelopes the same way he killed her. He used his bike. He wanted to avoid cameras, but we know from his phone where he was, and we know he sent those envelopes. South Carolina doesn't have a statute for revenge porn, but we have harassment, and that's what it is. But he's doing this for a strategic reason in the custody battle. And Zack put a lot of work into that, to someone he's never met or talked to. John Mello is a liar. He dated Christina in 2005 and 2006 and had their daughter in 2012. Then the custody battle started. If you want to know John Mello's character, remember, the Guardian ad litem testified he would do horrific things to her. A lawyer who is representing a little girl. He would post accusations on social media to humiliate her, and that's who he is. John sent an email pretending to be a lawyer to the Guardian. She knew it was John Mello because she had read so much from him, and it all matched up. Zack met up with John 5 times here and then went to Italy for 3 weeks in June. Zack said John Mello offered him 5,000, then 10,000 to kill Christina. Zack said he would do it for free because it was the right thing to do. And that's when the plot to murder Christina began. The harassment envelopes were mailed out in June and July. And interestingly, a struggling pianist turned down $10,000 and offered to kill her for free. Kill a person he's never met on behalf of a child he barely knows. I think a lot of what he said on the stand was self-serving, narcissistic junk. He's trying to make himself the hero instead of the cold-blooded killer he is. If we don't hold him accountable, a lot of people will get stabbed and I'll be out of a job. In October, The Guardian is getting close to making her decision on custody, and her investigation revealed she would write a favorable report for Christina and a bad one for John. In addition, it was almost 6 months after the child had been home. And after 6 months in South Carolina, someone can file to terminate the parental rights of the other parent, and that time was coming. If Christina wasn't around, John would get custody. Zack decides to kill Christina. That was his intent. He bought a gun and a knife a month before. It was weighing on his soul, so he started planning. We know he came from the mountain home and parked near Canebrake. Mello told him the schedules for everybody that day. I submit he arrived around 7:42 a.m. His phone shows it being plugged in and unlocked, and that's the last activity on his phone for a period of time. He rides past Miss Gorman's house and she identifies him. She was right, and the DNA proved it. Zack proved it. Donna sees him around 8:15 when he goes by, and then he goes to Christina's house. My opinion is he hid under the bottom of the house. He says he dropped his bike and went to the front door. He had an hour to drive around Canebrake and an hour wait. He could have turned around, changed his mind, but he was committed. He waited for a certain time because he knew her address, her car, and her schedule. And he walked in with roses, a gun, a knife, a backpack, paint thinner to clean up with, and he killed her. At this point, they play the Ring camera footage of Zack at the door. The solicitor says he goes in, he hits her in the head with a gun. He slashes and stabs. Think of the force needed to stab someone all over after all the fighting, stabbing, and pushing while Christina is fighting for her life. And he finds the vulnerable spot, the jugular and the carotid artery, and he kills her. He drags her through her own blood, closes the curtains, closes the front door, and she's left in her scrubs and the wedding band Brad Post gave her. Those rose petals had a dual purpose: to get inside, but he also sprinkled them around the house and in her purse, some sort of a sadistic sign he thought was necessary. This killing was not to save the child. This was to help John Mello with his custody battle. He covers it up. He had to worry about the DNA under her fingernail, so he wiped them down with paint thinner. He didn't want to get caught. He goes back to the mountain house, connected to the Wi-Fi, and it's a perfect place to clean up. Remember, one investigator said it was so secluded you could walk around naked? Can you imagine how soaked in blood his clothes were, his car, his bike? He burned his clothes, threw the gun and knife in a pond, and went back to the house on Tyndall to his daily life. I'm sorry you had the unfortunate privilege of hearing about the cold-blooded murder of Christina Parcell and the excuses he gave instead of the cold-blooded killer he is. The absurdity of many of his words, and I'll reference a couple. I wanted to make her death quick and painless. It's hard to comprehend someone says that at their trial to a jury. Thank you. Thanks for taking my pain into consideration as you murdered me. Was it quick and painless when he stabbed her the first time, the second time, the 5th, the 10th, the 20th? How about that final 35th blow? And then I asked him one question. How did you drag her body? By her arms or her ankles? He said he didn't recall, but he thinks her ankles. He looked into my eyes in a stone cold way as he answered. He waited to kill Christina after everyone was gone. But what if a neighbor did come over? What if Brad or Tina showed up? Would it be a double homicide so he could escape detection? He was so calculated, he got her schedule that day from John Mello. He said he didn't want to get caught because they would connect him to John Mello. But then he testifies and connects John Mello, and it makes no sense. We talked about his background. He's a fantastic pianist. And when he went through his resume, his ego, letting you know how great he was, playing difficult sonatas by Beethoven. It's never been done. He described his sister Grace in great detail how horrible she was. She would go stone cold, a vampire who would suck the good out of people. But he was really describing himself. He said he felt pity for Christina. Is that even possible? His heart is so mean and depraved, he discussed in specific details of killing her, treating her like she was an elderly dog sent to the vet to be euthanized. It doesn't get any meaner than that. Christina didn't have to die. Vigilante justice isn't allowed regardless of what he had in his mind. He lied to himself. All he had was hate and meanness and coldness. The evidence is absolutely overwhelming, and I ask you find him guilty on all charges. And the defense was up for their closings. I want to start with something Mr. Wilkins said towards the beginning of his closing statements. Zack solved John's problems. No, Zack solved the child's problems. He told you under oath he killed Christina. But contrary to what they just told you, killing someone is not a crime. Mr. Wilkins said he confessed to the crime. That's not the case. He said he killed Christina and didn't tell you or confess to any crime. Every crime has two parts, the action and what's in your mind, the intent. They have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. He confessed to killing her, but not to a crime. That in and of itself doesn't make him guilty of murder. There's one unique thing about this. The action involved. There's very little dispute. Zack admitted he killed her. The dispute is, the heart of this case is the evidence as to what was in his heart and mind. The heart of this case is intent. What have they proven about his intent? Zack is charged with murder. They must prove malice. That's the intent and the knowledge. Burglary in the first degree, that's when he went in the home he intended to commit the crime in. For harassment, they must prove he sent the mailers without a legitimate purpose. And for the conspiracy, they must prove he conspired to do something illegal. What has the state proved beyond reasonable doubt as to what was in his heart? The state is going to use circumstantial evidence. We're using direct and circumstantial to explain his state of mind. It's more than the act. This is a tragic case, bottom line. And the last thing I want to do is minimize the tragedy in this case. The state says stab, stab, slash, slash. Of the 35 wounds, the vast majority were superficial. He said they struggled and fell to the floor, and his body wasn't doing what he told it to because he didn't want to have to do it. Circumstantial evidence the state used. Donna Gorman testified 3 years after the murder. She had never been shown a photo of Zack's face, but it's been all over the TV and internet for 3 years. There's no way she saw Zack at 8:15. And the state's own evidence with the Ring cameras, Zack didn't get there until after 9. Think about how much weight to assign to the guardian's testimony. The state asked the guardian, prior to October 13th of 2021, did you have a recommendation as to where the child should live? Her answer at the time was, I would have recommended the mom at the time, but there was no follow-up to talk about other times. Can you trust that evidence? It's very important because that's circumstantial. Let's talk about the direct evidence. He testified to what he was told by John Mello. He had a lot of other information aside from what John Mello told him. He had a deposition Christina gave in 2016. And I asked Zack, after you read that deposition, what did you believe about Christina? He said she was engaged in prostitution, did a pornographic movie, and used drugs. Zack got Alex Field's affidavit. This entire case, they've tried to distance Christina from the escort website, saying they're private photos taken by John Mello and put online by John Mello. But think about this. In the Alex Fields affidavit, Christina propositioned him for sex and drugs. And John Mello said, if you know this woman, Christina Parcell, AKA Caroline Warren, in the Craigslist ad, if he didn't think she went by Caroline Warren online, why would he put that in the ad for people to respond to? He put it on there because she was Caroline Warren. He hoped someone would recognize her and reach out to him. And there's the elephant in the room, the plan. Zack was honest when he told you the plan. One unique thing about this case is the person he believed posed the danger was the mother to her own child. Think about that. This isn't where you're home and an intruder comes in, and this isn't random. This is what Zack believed. A mother, the one who's supposed to be the most nurturing, but she is the one doing this to the child. You have a belief grounded in documents, information shared with you over months. This doesn't show malice because the mom was the predator and she posed the danger. The solicitor said this was for John to get custody. Why would Zack wait so long to do it? The child and John have been separated for 6 months, and if that were the reason, why wouldn't he have done it much sooner? He told you about his mental and physical struggles when he was on his way to do this. He did what he believed he had to do to save an innocent child, and it's more than the action. He hasn't confessed to a crime, but he told you what he did. The state said, why would a pianist turn down $10,000? There's no evidence John Mello paid him a dime to do this. Nobody was in Zack's shoes. We weren't in the position where we think the child was being abused by her own mother, and John Mello is in Italy. He couldn't come back because he would have been arrested. DSS did nothing. We haven't been in his shoes. The state said this didn't have to happen. We don't have a burden to prove that Zack exhausted all remedies. He tried, and when everything failed, that's when he acted to save the child. For harassment, there has to be evidence she suffered mental distress, and there's none. 3 people testified about these mailers. Did any of them testify Christina was crying or shaking or upset that led them to believe she was upset? The state brought the charges you are to consider, specifically the murder charge, the most serious there is. Murder, in contrast to what the state's position is, requires more than the act of killing. It requires malice, evil, hatred. And in the openings, this state said Zack had an angry heart. The evidence has failed to show you that you should be firmly convinced that Zack had hatred. That evidence hasn't been close. 3 years in hindsight is fair for you to say this didn't have to happen. I wouldn't have done that. It's fair to say that, but no matter what your take on what he did is, I think it's important you rely on your common sense. I ask you to use your common sense and ask yourself, does a person who kills another with the intent to save an innocent child, does that person have evil in their heart? Does that person have an angry heart? I think your common sense will tell you no. That person who killed to save an innocent child did not murder. For rebuttal, the state quickly gets back up and they say you have to have emotional distress for the harassment. Her neighbors got photos of her naked. Brad took those and she went to police. The defense says to minimize the killing of Christina and the heinousness of this crime. They talked about malice, and the defense says you've got to have it in your heart in regard to an angry heart. Just because Zack's heart is so cold and dead it can't be angry, that's not a defense. It was proven by his actions. The jury goes back to deliberate. They come back with several questions pretty quickly in the process. The first one we all thought might have been pro-defense because their question was, define malice. Is malice required for a murder charge? The judge brought the jury back into the courtroom to recharge them on murder and also told them, yes, malice is required. The second and third jury questions was explaining the difference between first degree harassment, second degree harassment, as well as first degree conspiracy to commit harassment and second degree conspiracy to commit harassment. Wasn't long after that third question, we got notification there was a verdict, guilty on all charges, although the jury did get him for the second degree harassment and second degree conspiracy to commit harassment. We moved into sentencing shortly after. There were victim impact statements by Tina Parcell as well as Zachary Hughes's father. I'm going to play those now and let you hear them for yourself.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will apologize in advance. I didn't expect to actually reach this point today. This is my second victim statement in 24 hours. Yesterday was reliving the two worst days of my life. Between hearing the step-by-step account of my sister's murder, Mr. Mello's two new charges, his bond hearing, and my niece being put into emergency protective care again. So I am exhausted, and I'm going to do my best to express myself appropriately. So with Your Honor's leniency, just give me a bit of grace. My understanding is this conversation is with you. This isn't with the defendant. This is not with counsel. This is not with the gallery. So this is a conversation with you. And I've had 3 years to try to articulate how this has impacted me, and I still have yet to find the words, and it won't happen tonight either. So I've decided instead to talk about what logically should be taken into consideration for any sentencing, which is remorse, rehabilitation, and recidivism. This defendant sat on that stand with full disregard for the authority of the law when it came to his actions outside of this courtroom, and blatant disregard for the authority of law inside this courtroom. He recounted step by step in excruciating detail everything he did. And if I may paraphrase the defense counsel's closing statement, did he cry? Did he shake? Did he look visibly distressed? He said the word repulsed, but did he once look repulsed? He said the word vomited. Did he ever once look nauseated as he described dragging my sister through my living room? Cold doesn't begin to describe the lack of emotion. And if I may be blunt, if we're going to argue somebody has to have malice and hate in their heart to be capable of murder, then one could also argue that anyone medically diagnosed as antisocial personality disorder is therefore not capable of committing murder. I think that is a logical fallacy, is asinine. And the fact that I'm tired, I will no longer go down that, but there has been no remorse once shown by this defendant in this courtroom. Without remorse, you cannot have rehabilitation. Rehabilitation requires acknowledgement that I have done a wrong, I have a debt to pay, and I can improve to become a better member of society. It begins with remorse. Without remorse, there is no rehabilitation. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, you have recidivism. This man, no, I'm sorry, this defendant wanted to kill someone. He joined the Marines, specifically the infantry. He wanted to kill someone. He was given a target on a silver platter. He was given an address, a date, a time, and he planned it. Because he knew that if he planned it just enough, he would never get caught. He planned it so much that he thought, well, even when I got caught, I got this. I can still get out of this. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, any person that goes through that effort to commit a murder would absolutely do it again to see if they could. You're left with either two options. Either he is a weak, easily manipulated man who would kill anybody that anyone asked him to, or he's not a weak and easily manipulated man. And if that's the case, then he absolutely would do this again to see if he's smart enough this time, to see if he can beat it this time, because he has shown no respect for the law of this courtroom. The only thing that I will say about this situation overall is that all of these men did nothing but use my sister. John Mello used her to create a whole new family when he had a wife and children already. Brad Post used her. This defendant used her. All of them used her for their own twisted personal gratification. He would do it again. Without remorse, without rehabilitation, you will have recidivism. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, ma'am. If anybody else?
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to speak a few words on my son's behalf. The trial is over. A verdict's been rendered, and we accept that. What I want to speak to, because I understand this is the sentencing phase of the trial, where you have some parameter of your sentence. My son is probably, in my lifetime, and I've run into some pretty amazing people, and this is going to be seen as a bias from the father, but he has got such a strong moral compass and fortitude and desire for the truth in his life than really anyone I've ever met. He actually eclipses a lot of those things that I aspire to myself. It's what makes his music so incredibly meaningful, because as a musician, and there are some world-class musicians sitting here today, colleagues of Zack's, what makes a musician's art come through is what's the essence of who they are. It's not something you can fake. When you hear it, you know it's a fake. When you hear music that causes people in a room to weep, you know it's coming from something inside that person that you cannot describe. Zack was not born with a silver spoon in his mouth. I want to tell you that. I taught all my children, Zack being the oldest, the value of hard work. He might have been the only person at Juilliard to show up without manicured fingernails and calluses instead. He worked hard. I pushed him hard. Fathers and parents tend to do that with their firstborn child. And maybe I pushed him, a little hard at times, but it made him the man he is today. I want to address something, and Mr. Wilkins?
I got to just address the whole thing.
That Zack is a cold-blooded killer. I am sorry. Zack wrote his mother and I a letter delivered to us through his attorneys approximately a month ago. In that letter, he described basically what he did in that chair over there, only a little more detail. Why he did what he had to do, what he felt he had to do. You heard him say in that chair, he wasn't going to go on a cruise ship to Bora Bora, where he was headed, and look himself in the mirror at night after playing beautiful classical music for rich people. He couldn't do that. Zack has been brutally honest in his life. So much, sometimes to the detriment of his own career. Everybody in the piano world wants to be a soloist with an orchestra. But it's a very small amount of room on the head of that pin, and that's where he was headed. But he had people in his life, donors, rich benefactors, who made demands of him artistically in exchange for their financial benefit, and he walked away from it to the detriment of his own career. Why do I bring that up? He has such a strong moral compass and a desire for the truth that sometimes he actually hurts himself. His friends here, all these people in this courtroom for the last 2 weeks have been here day in, day out. Some as far as from Seattle, Washington. They're here because they grew up with Zack in the music world, and they saw something in him they didn't see in anybody else. He has got a loyal circle of friends that I never had. I told my kids when they grew up, if you, at the end of your life, you end up with 2 or 3 people in your hand that are really there for you, that's the guy I want in the foxhole with me. Consider yourself lucky. Zack's got a dozen of those. Why? Bettina, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm not supposed to mention her name. I'm sorry. But I want you to know, Zack had felt compelled to do what he did because of what he would quote Edmund Burke on this. The only thing necessary for evil to prosper is for good men to do nothing. Okay. His desire for the truth and his truthful telling of what happened. I mean, he sat there and he didn't hold anything back that would benefit his portrayal to this court. He's just as brutally honest with himself as he is with other people. He has no criminal record whatsoever before this event. The only thing I know of is an outstanding traffic ticket in Italy somehow he rang up when he was there with Mello. And several of the guards in the detention center, where he's been for 3 years, he's been an exemplary inmate, have told him that they were going to come to this trial to support him. When you gain the silent respect of law enforcement officers, they see something in you, they see it all. And they see a guy that's respectful for 3 years without a single incident. I think that counts for something. So I'm just here, I'll wrap it up. As you determine your sentencing, I would ask you to consider what type of man he is. And take that into consideration. I love my son. I'm proud of my son. Thank you, Your Honor.
After the victim impact statements, the judge sentenced Zachary to life in prison. There was a press conference after the defense very briefly said that they plan to appeal. I'm going to post the link to the press conference with Solicitor Walt Wilkins. You can go watch that. And that was it. there's so much going on with each player in this case. And as I said, we're not finished. Going to be following John Mello's case up to and throughout trial. So stick with me. I hope you guys have a great weekend and we will see you soon.